Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's disability information video. I'm your host Oliver, and this week we're going to be covering the topic of spinal cord injuries. So to give a bit of background on this topic and to kind of give you the necessary information required to understand what's going on with a spinal cord injury, I'll just explain a bit about how our brain works in connection with the rest of our body. So much of what our brain does is take in information from our senses, so our eyes, our nose, our mouth, and our touch. So we form judgments about what the world is like around us, and we use that to decide what actions we're going to take in the world. When we usually think of the brain in this context, we often think of it as kind of just this pink wrinkly blob that's just in our head somewhere. We don't necessarily see it, but we know it's there. But most people kind of just think of their brain as being in their head, and that's it. But I kind of want to challenge that a bit today. So while we usually think of our brain as just being in our head, it's actually important to recognize that our brain is just one part of a much broader network that stretches across our entire body. So our brain is kind of like the control center for this entire network, which we call the nervous system, which goes from our brain and connects all the way down our arms to our fingers. It connects all the way down our legs to our toes. It's basically the system that allows your body to communicate with your brain. So this nervous system is, the core of it is basically formed by our spinal cord. So you can feel your spinal cord right now. If you arch your back a bit, you can feel it bend. It's a solid structure, but it's flexible enough to allow you to move. But what's important to realize is that across your entire spinal cord, there are nerves that connect your brain up here with the rest of your body. So these nerves are essentially little, what we call cells, that basically each communicate a little piece of information when they fire. And all these neurons firing together is what sends a signal from one part of your body to your brain. And so now that we've kind of talked about how our brain is connected to the rest of our body through these nerves, we can now get a little bit into what a spinal cord injury is. So a spinal cord injury occurs when damage to a specific area of the spine results in temporary or permanent changes in sensation, movement, strength, and body functions below the site of injury. Now, there's one thing that I think is interesting to note there, which is that it's below the site of injury. So if you get a spinal injury up here, so I'm touching basically the base of my neck here, that affects your entire body below that area. Likewise, if you get a spinal injury at the base of your spine, so on your lower back, for example, that will only affect the part of your body below that area. Now, the reason for that is because our brain is the central area that controls the rest of our body. So when our spinal cord is injured and all those nerves that connect our brain to the rest of our body are damaged, that makes it difficult or impossible for our brain up here to communicate with the part of the body underneath where the injury occurs. So that's why spinal cord injuries affect the part of the body beneath the injury. So with that in mind, injuries to your spinal cord that occur higher up are generally more severe because they cut off contact with a greater part of one's body. So if you get injured at the base of your neck, it's likely that your spinal cord injury is more severe than someone who gets injured at the base at the bottom of their back, basically, because more of your body will be affected through that injury. Furthermore, one important detail to recognize about spinal cord injuries is that they're not always completely severing your spinal cord. That meaning it's not like your complete spine is being separated It's more like there's damage to a particular area of the spine that affects the communication. That means that the injury is sometimes incomplete, meaning that your body can still send some signals, but not all signals to your brain. So, furthermore, but sometimes, with that in mind, some injuries to your spinal cord are complete, meaning that communication is completely cut off once and for all. So it's important to recognize that not all spinal injuries completely cut off all contact between the brain and the rest of your body. They may only partially sever the connection. Now, spinal cord injuries are usually caused by traumatic injuries that cause damage to the spine. The most common of these being motor vehicle accidents, so car accidents where someone ends up injuring their spine and getting a spinal cord injury and then cutting off the connection between their body and their brain through that. So now that we've kind of covered what a spinal cord injury is, one thing I wanted to address a little further is one common misconception about spinal cord injuries, and that is that spinal cord injuries are always permanent. Most people believe that spinal cord injuries affect someone for life, but the truth is that not all spinal cord injuries are like this. Some spinal cord injuries do affect a person for their entire life, but sometimes you get, as we discussed, a partial injury to your spinal cord, meaning that your body can still communicate with your brain to a degree, and this means that you can still maintain some connection and can potentially heal from your injury, meaning that any loss in functioning can potentially be recovered at a later date for some injuries. So what's important to recognize here with spinal cord injuries is that every spinal cord injury is different. It'll affect a different area of the spine, which means that if it'll end up affecting a different area of the body. And it also varies as to whether the spinal cord injury is complete or whether it is only partial. So with that in mind, I think we've kind of gained a good understanding of what it means to have a spinal cord injury. And now that we've done that, I think we can move into the next part of our video, which will be an interview with someone with lived experience with a spinal cord injury.
Hello, and welcome to the RCD ShareNet. I'm Dave Thompson, Community Outreach Coordinator and ShareNet contributor here, and we are continuing with our 3-month-long focus on disability information. And today we are talking about SCI, or spinal cord injury. And we have a friend of mine and a friend of RCD that has helped us out with different things over the years, last couple of years. And he is going to answer some questions that we've been posing to everyone in this whole series. So welcome, Miles. How are you today?
Oh, fine.
Awesome.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. So the first question that we ask in this is, what are 2 aspects of SCI or your spinal cord injury that other people may, sort of stereotypes that they think or that they may be surprised about?
Okay, well,
that affect your life, sort of.
Yeah, and I think the big one that really, that I became aware of as a person with a spinal cord injury was just access, just being able to move around and get into places. I mean, before my spinal cord injury, I never really thought twice about getting around or going anywhere that I needed to go. It was just something that you did. You walked there, you rode your bike, you drove, you took the bus, anything like that. And it was just an accepted reality of what of your life. But afterwards, after being able to, after taking for granted that any store, restaurant, building that I wanted to get into, I could get into. It all changed when suddenly I've got a significant mobility impairment. You're on crutches or you're using a wheelchair, and suddenly that accessibility is very much a consideration for you. Especially true of outdoor activities. When I was, before I was injured, I was very actively involved in outdoor activities, hiking. When I was younger, I loved exploring, did a lot of fishing and scuba diving. And those are activities that, I can still participate in, but there's a lot of other considerations that I have to take into account
Right. There's a lot of pre-planning,
exactly.
going on. Yeah.
Yeah,
you got to think about a lot of stuff that you just took for granted before. Every single entry out of the house is now a 20-minute question list of things that we got all lined up, kind of.
That's very true. And depending on sort of the complexity of where you want to go and what you want to do, it just everything's got to line up. And that kind of segues into the next question that you had, which is another aspect of life that people might not think about, and that was something like travel. Everybody, well, I don't know if everybody does. Many people love to travel and people love to just get away, even if it's just for the day, or a couple of days, getting on a bus or a ferry or on an aircraft. And this is kind of, it's kind of linked to the access piece. It just makes it more difficult. One of my jobs involved a lot of getting in and out of small planes and moving around and flying around the province. And when you have enough mobility to get in and out of those vehicles, it's not a big deal. But as soon as your mobility starts to become limited, then it's all of a sudden a much more of a consideration.
And do you use a standard chair or a power chair?
Oh, I'm a standard chair now.
Okay.
I mean, my situation is I was injured at a very young age, and I still had a lot of mobility, and I was able to get around with crutches. And then then I started relying on leg braces, and then I started relying more on wheelchair as my situation basically just is more degenerative over time.
Right.
So I've kind of experienced a kind of a slow progression of increased reliance on mobility.
Because that's kind of a different aspect too, is those power chairs add weight and size, and
it's a huge consideration. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was younger, none of the buses in the city I live in were wheelchair accessible. It was just didn't happen. BC ferries were an issue because, to get from the car deck up into the passenger area,
the knee knockers.
Yeah, it's usually a staircase.
We used to call them in the Navy the knee knockers.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, things have evolved significantly since then. I mean, one of the things I find very, I really laud the city of Vancouver for is, and BC Ferries, is that now, I can leave Victoria and I can leave my car in the parking lot at Sports Bay, and I don't have to, I can rely on, I don't have to drive. I can rely on public transit the whole time I'm in the Lower Mainland. It's quite easier. It travels easier than it was. I mean, back a number of years ago, if you were a person with a chair, you got treated pretty much like luggage, and I think that's even there's a lot of that still with people who have power chairs for a lot of the reasons that you pointed out.
Yeah, we've had stories over the last couple of years. I can't remember exactly, but one time where someone had to sort of remind people, this is part of my life. You can't just toss it under the airplane like a piece of a suitcase, right? If it's not functioning when I come out the other side, then we've got a problem. And I think that's what had happened to them, is like they had damaged the chair in transit, and she was just stuck, right? Like, what do I do now? So they have to kind of realize that.
I've heard stories like that, especially with things like power chairs. I had an experience once flying to Saskatchewan, Regina, and I got there, and when they brought my chair up, and the tire was flat. And you can see somebody pushed something against the chair and pushed over the stem on the for the tube in the tire, and it had gone down. Luckily, I had another tube, so I'm pretty proficient. So I basically just pulled the wheel off and put a new tube in. But it could have been a lot worse. Somebody, if they'd have bent the frame or done something like that, yeah, I would have been in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, they have to really realize it's an extension of you in that sense, right? Alrighty, awesome. So what do you think are the two most important things that you use to manage your SCI, your injury?
I thought about that question, and I kind of thought, well, what would be things that you have to think about as a person with a spinal cord injury that somebody who's able-bodied wouldn't probably really consider. And I thought that well, there's additional health considerations. Persons with spinal cord injuries often lack sensation below the level of their injury, and they don't have any sensation, so they're not aware of things like even slight discomfort where you're where you're sitting or positioned. And an able-bodied person, if they feel uncomfortable the way they're sitting or sleeping or whatever, they just reposition themselves and shift their weight around, and they do that in response to the sensation that they're getting. Well, someone with an spinal cord injury doesn't get that kind of feedback from their lower body due to the paralysis, so they might end up sitting or lying in the same position without moving for extended periods of time, and this can lead to pressure building up in places on your skin. You get pressure sores developing, and these can become focal points for infection. And this can have serious implications if it's not addressed. So,
and you can actually cut your leg or whatnot else and not know about it, or break them. I've even heard, and and you got to heal that. You might not feel it, but it's still affecting the rest of your body. So you have to have it functioning properly, right?
Oh yeah, for someone with a spinal cord injury, you have to be very vigilant to make sure that you monitor, yourself for, cuts, bruises, abrasions, sores, anything like that. Because if you let it get out of hand, then you can be faced with some significant health problems.
And it's not just the fact that big deal, you can't feel it, but it's still connected to you, right? So you need to
it can still end up it can still be a focal point for infection. You can still end up with septicemia in your blood, and that can. I know of people with spinal cord injuries that were kind of not that vigilant, and they passed away because of they had chronic infections. So it's something you really have to think about, and it's also important for persons with spinal cord injuries to keep active, and to basically, like everybody, you got to watch your weight, and not just for a lot of the same reasons that anybody else has to do it, because your general health, your heart, and your circulatory system, because persons who experience spinal cord injuries, they can end up leading a more sessile lifestyle. And over time, this can affect their general health and result in significant weight gain. And when you're a person with a lower body mobility impairment, you start relying on your upper body to do a lot of the hard work. So you're relying on your upper body for a lot of your mobility needs. And if you let yourself get overweight and heavy, that just puts additional strain on your upper body and your arms and your shoulders.
Well, yeah, now you're pushing more weight with those shoulders in the chair, right?
Exactly.
I have a couple of coworkers here that I've always said, or they finally got one of those free wheels, the middle sort of, just to take the strain. To pushing a wheelchair for 30 years, those shoulders aren't going to take it for an infinite amount of time, right?
No.
This is a bit of a fun one. What's something that really makes your day, that either just personally or that makes it easier for you to manage your
I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that again, and I mean, it's really tough not to sort of get back to the accessibility bit. I find that when accessibility is sort of factored into things, into places and buildings that set up a wheelchair accessibility beforehand, it really makes a difference. I went on a trip to the Big Island of Hawaii a few years ago, and one of the things that really made the trip enjoyable was that the accessibility of the amenities on the island. Even
Yeah.
the beaches were relatively accessible in many of the places I visited. They had concrete pathways that went very nearly all the way to the water's edge.
They have those
Um,
sand mats. I've seen those sand
yeah,
mats and the big inflatable wheelchairs you can get too.
yeah. I've
Yeah.
never tried the big inflatable. Well, you know what? I have. I used it. So the what's it called? There's a group locally here that and in the Lower Mainland that helps facilitate recreation for persons with disabilities. And I remember going surfing in Tofino, and they had a
Oh,
couple of
there's BC
wheelchairs.
Moss. There's BC Moss
No, it's
and
called
Tetra.
no, it was Reach Forward or
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I can't come up with the name, and that's really bad because it's a great organization that I found really helpful. And they had some wheelchairs that were set up with great big sort of tires, and we were wheeling around on the beach in Tofino.
Hmm. Right.
When we were snorkeling, or sorry, skiing or surfing. It was wonderful. And in Hawaii, similar situations. They had the mat set up. Even something as simple as having some hard packed areas where the sand was hard packed, so you could get down to the water's edge to get in the water and do some snorkeling and swimming. Even the docks there, we went on a couple excursions where we went out in Zodiacs and did some snorkeling and sightseeing, and it was great because they had a
Yeah.
concrete ramp that got you down to the dock level. You got on the dock, you get down to
Yeah, because that transfer is the big deal, right? A lot
it
of
really
times,
is.
especially
Yeah,
with like cruises, there's a, we just jump into this little boat here when you're moving.
yeah, yeah. And even
we've had
somebody who's
we've had
not.
a couple people here that have injured themselves in the transfer from the cruise ship to the tender.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even somebody who's maybe not they're just a little elderly and they're just a little stiff in the joint. I mean, even then, those people can you know uh, be helped by those kind of accessibility considerations.
Yeah. Alrighty. So our final questions today are: what are some words of empowerment and encouragement you could give somebody just maybe not just starting out or anybody with a spinal cord injury?
Uh,
Give us your wisdom, oh wise one.
well, I tell you, I looked at that, and that's I have I'm sort of conflicted a little bit with those kind of questions. Because I really don't agree with the way that persons with disabilities, especially people with spinal cord injuries, the way they get portrayed in the media. And it's
Yeah.
almost like, anybody with a disability, when you see them portrayed in the media, the focus is on their disability and how, and it's often, how heroic these people are, and how superhuman they are because they've got this disability. They're gonna climb a mountain, or they're gonna push their wheelchair around the world. I mean, it's not reality. The fact is very opposite to that. In most cases, someone who experiences a spinal cord injury often feels very helpless and not empowered. It's usually an incredibly challenging experience. It's not like a lot of other disabilities. It usually has very sudden and often violent onset. And it's a huge change in your lifestyle and in your capacity and capabilities. So I don't know if I've really got words of encouragement as much as I just want to reach out to these people and encourage them to, if anything, just to take time and adjust and don't be afraid to seek out and engage with assistance.
All right. Thank you very much, sir,
Yeah.
for doing this. And this will be, I think this is going to be one of our last in the series. And keep watching here for our next quarter, where we're going to be talking about parenting and disability. And that's going to be our next 3 months. We're going to be focusing on all different. We're going to look at the different ages of a disabled child. We're also going to look at the other side. If you're the person disabled and you have children as well. So there's lots of important sort of talking points there as well. So that's coming up in April, May, and June. So thanks again, Miles.
I'll watch out for
And,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you very
and
much. And
ha-
we'll be
have a
talking
good
soon,
weekend.
I'm sure. Take care, Dave.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.